and we can get this show. All right, everybody, welcome to our September virtual tasting for the Forgotten Grapes Wine Club. We are so excited to have Casey Graybehl of the Grenachista Wine Company with us. Better late than never, but he is here, and that's the most important thing. Hopefully everybody missed me from my little sojourn last month where I missed it, but I know Allison did a fantastic job with Tara of the Tara Wine Company. Everybody here, so
you gotta mute.
Muted. Yep, I think I've got everybody muted at this point. So cool. So thank you, Allison, for covering for me while I was out doing Festival of Forgotten Grape deliveries. But we're excited to have Casey here. As I mentioned, it is International Grenache Day coming up next Friday, September 20th. So what better winery, what better winemaker could we have represented than the Grenachista himself, the owner, winemaker, founder, chief bottle washer, all things Grenache loving man, Casey Graybehl. Casey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's been a busy couple days, but doing well.
Excellent.
Yeah, there's nothing better than scheduling one of these during harvest and saying to a small winemaker that's a team of basically one, come join us for a night.
Yes. We appreciate you taking the time out to join us and to do this. I know everybody's very excited to taste your wines and to talk about all things Grenache. I've got all sorts of questions about some of your choices and decisions, and all positive, of course. But we always like to start out our virtual tastings by asking our winemaker, what is the most memorable bottle of wine that you've ever opened?
You know, obviously that's a pretty tough question. It would
That's why we ask
it. It would depend on if we're talking about the wine that made me go, I want to do this the rest of my life, or if we're talking about a bottle I've opened after that and gone, God, this is the most amazing wine I ever had.
What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Well, since I only make Grenache, I always kind of reflect back on when I was going to college. I was in the Central Coast. Long story of how I ended up down there to start working in the wine industry. But I met with a group of people that were interns going to Cal Poly as well for viticulture and enology, or just people new in the industry. And one of those people I didn't know at the time, I met later officially, was Michael Lerner from Ballard Canyon down in Santa Barbara County. And he had brought a barrel sample of some Grenache. I think it was probably like third or fourth leaf on that vineyard that now it's pretty well known. And we tasted it, and I really moved. And I tasted that and went, wow, what is this? This is like everything I want out of a Pinot, but more. And that's moment has always stuck with me, and that's why I ended up doing what I do.
Nice. All right, since you teased it, we have to know what the other wine that made you go, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever had in my life is.
That one's a little tougher because my brain just doesn't really work that way. I don't like hold on to that one bottle. I remember many bottles, or producers. It's more like that. It's I can't say that I've had many bottles in my life where I went like, except for that barrel tasting of Grenache, but that was more cerebral, where it's more been an enjoyment with like, this is the best wine I've ever had. It's always been like, this is a damn good wine. And that's where it lands. So I don't really have an answer for that one.
All right. Well, since we've got a good 75 minutes to kill, why don't you tell us how you ended up on the Central Coast? Where was home for you originally? And how did you end up, A, in the Central Coast, and then B, getting into winemaking?
I grew up in the East Bay in of the Bay Area in Northern California, a little town called San Ramon. It was a little town when I grew up there. It's now quite a large town. But my parents were always wine drinkers. My father had lived in Germany when he was younger and had started drinking wines there when they were young. And so it was always on our table, so I was familiar with it. But I eventually moved to San Francisco with my older brother who was going to San Francisco State. And I started working in some restaurants while I figured out what I wanted to do and going to some junior college and just kind of, working through your early 20s. And I was working at a pretty nice restaurant in the inner Sunset. And we had a local little dive bar that we all went to after work, and got to know the bartender quite well, as 22 through 24-year-olds do. And we were sitting at the bar one night, and she told our group of friends that I'm going to go to school to learn how to grow grapevines so I can make wine. And I had never heard of that as being a profession. And I went, that's the coolest thing I ever heard. And in those, early 20 years, when you're trying to figure out what you want to be when you grow up, I was like, that's it. That's the thing I want to do. And so about 6 months later, me and my girlfriend at the time moved down to San Luis Obispo because we had a family friend that owned a winery in Paso Robles, and I did my first harvest in Paso Robles. I started going to Allen Hancock Junior College in Santa Maria, and from there transferred to San Luis Obispo and lived in the Central Coast for about 6 years, all the while working in little wineries here and there as interns or internships and after hours when school was out. And that's really where I got my start and why I ended up in the Central Coast. I am no longer in the Central Coast. In 2004, I moved back up to the Bay Area, but that's how I ended up down there.
Yeah, and we want to talk about your transition from Central Coast up to Sonoma area, where you're really focusing on Grenache production up there. But before we do that, I think we're going to kick things off with the Grenache Blanc, because you were busy. We didn't really have a chance to go through the order, but I think it's pretty apparent the way we'll do these. But let's talk a little bit about the Grenache Blanc. Obviously, this falls within the purview of a Grenachista, but when most people hear the word Grenache, it's not generally the first grape they think of. Were you looking to put a white into the portfolio, or was there something about Grenache Blanc that just, really, really interested you?
It's kind of starts with the origin story. When I started this label in 2013, I did 1 ton of Dry Creek Valley Grenache Noir, but I knew that I needed to have a white in the lineup, and I hadn't really tried a lot of Grenache Blanc at that point. I've had white.
You're good. We've still got you.
Okay, I've had plenty of white Chateauneufs, and wines that were from southern France that were Grenache Blanc based, but I never had a single varietal. And there wasn't a lot planted in the North Bay at that point. So in 2014, the second year of making wines under this label, I found 2 vineyards that had Grenache Blanc. One was up in Lake County, and one was was actually from Mounts in Dry Creek Valley, the one I was getting Grenache Noir from. So I made 2 Grenache Blancs that year because I thought that people would want to try 2 different Grenache Blancs next to each other and see how terroir affected those grapes. I since have decided that that's one is plenty. It's not like a Chardonnay where the sites really show much
there
difference.
There are people out there, but it's a very, very small subset, I suspect.
You're right. So I've gone back to.
I would be in that subset, just so you know.
Well, but when you think about how beautiful Grenache Blanc is, as we taste and have others, that as white wines go, Grenache Blanc offers texture and freshness and acidity. So, you get diversity. You probably get diversity from different vineyards, but it's such a delicious wine. It's a delicious grape anyway. Why wouldn't you want to have 2 or 3?
And what did you pick up? I'm interested in what you picked up in the different terroirs between those first 2 Grenache Blancs that you worked with.
Well, I think that's really why I stopped doing it, because they were both very similar. They were varietal Grenache Blancs. And before I started making that, I went out and tasted every domestic. I did research, right? And I tasted every single varietal domestic Grenache Blanc I could find. In 2013, there were like 6, maybe 7. And they were all fat and waxy in that Chateauneuf style where it's a little overripe. And I didn't want that. That's not the kind of wines that I like to drink or make. So even in that first year in 2014, I made a leaner style, which probably at that point I was the only one doing. So it was a bit of a tough sell. It would have been a hand sell. People didn't really know Grenache Blanc unless you were a wine geek. So it was really a marketing aspect that it drew me back into like, hey, let's just focus on this one. But if you taste the 214 side by side, which I have done in the past, they are different wines. One is very acid driven. The other's a little more fruit driven. There is a sense of terroir, but at the end of the day, I think that the varietal characteristics really take over. So they're not different enough that most people would be interested in like tasting them side by side. And I kind of stick by that now, and especially because now we have the estate vineyard, so it's like now we're only doing one.
Casey, I have a question for you as grapes go, because I know we don't have one today, but I know when you and I met for the Slow Wine Guide, the pretty exciting thing is you have Grenache Gris coming. So Grenache, there's Grenache Blanc, there's Grenache Gris, and there's Grenache Noir. Are they mutations of Grenache Noir, like Pinot Noir has mutations to Pinot Blanc, or are they not mutations?
They are all basically the same grape. If you planted a vineyard big enough for enough vineyard, you will end up with a random vine out there that came from the exact budwood that you knew it was, but had somehow started growing green grapes, or maybe bigger clusters, maybe littler clusters. I mean, they mutate. And so Grenache Blanc is actually a field mutation, and it probably was in Spain, where you planted a whole lot of Grenache Noir, and there was this one vine that had green fruit on it. And so they propagated that, thought it was interesting, and that's where Grenache Blanc comes from. And that's really where Grenache Gris comes from, although there is some ambiguity there, is that Grenache Gris may have actually been the grandfather of both. There's also a belief that it may actually be a cross-pollination of both. So
interesting.
No one really knows the history of Grenache Gris.
That sounds weirdly incestual, and I don't think we want to go there.
Well, and if you do the DNA testing, they all come from the same DNA, so you can't really track where those field mutations happen.
It's interesting, and I want to talk about Grenache Gris more at the end, because obviously that's a wine that you have upcoming, but it does seem like it's a vine that, rather than being, pulled up, torn out, and replaced with Grenache Noir, Grenache Blanc, more winemakers, more vineyards are embracing it, starting to plant it, propagate it, and you're starting to see more Grenache Gris standing on their own.
I wouldn't agree with that quite yet, but I think we're trending that way.
Certainly more than like 10 years ago, where, even if it's just 3 or 4 people, you're starting to see that movement, because there always has to be that first footstep.
Sure. I think 10 years ago, there was only one vineyard, and that was Gibson Ranch up in Mendocino. And those are 110-year-old vines, and it's about 2 acres. So now there's probably about 80 acres, and I'd say more than that. 65 of those have come on last year, and they're in Monterey County. So there are some people starting to push their chips in for it. There's always been a bit of a problem with doing it because Grenache Gris wasn't recognized as a varietal for the TTB. And so if you made one, you had to put Grenache Noir, or you had to put Grenache on it. You could put Grenache Gris as a fanciful name on the front label, but it would be registered as a Grenache. Luckily, that changed in April. So I think that, yes, you will start seeing more and more of it. Right now, there's 5 people making it.
Wow.
And the planting that you have, someone grafted over, and it's new that you're working with.
Correct. This is the first year I'm getting that fruit, and it was a bud graft last year from budwood that came from William Allen from Twin Shepherds, who has like 4 rows of it in his backyard. And that budwood came from Gibson Ranch. So yes, it's quite incestuous. But this was the first year on the rootstock, and we expected maybe, a quarter of a ton, but we picked it yesterday and it ended up being a 1.4 ton. So for first year,
wow.
it's quite vigorous, and Dave Mounts, who grafted it over for me, was actually really excited about it. He's like, I might put more of this. Look how, already we're getting fruit off of it.
Yeah, and more fruit than you expected. So how did you come to have your own estate vineyard? It's pretty amazing. And what are you working with on it?
Yeah, I met the man who lives there, Henry Mathis, in 2017 at the Girl and the Fig here in Sonoma. And he was making Grenache Blanc off of it just as a play thing. And he was selling it mainly to Girl and the Fig, which if those of you don't know is a quite well-known restaurant in Sonoma, and their wine list is exclusively Rhone varietals. So he had a Grenache Blanc, no one else did, and he was selling it there. And it was a lovely wine. And I was making wines from other properties, or Grenache Blanc from the Mounts and Dry Creek. And I got to know him a little bit. In 2019, he reached out to me and told me that they were just kind of over making wine, never made any money. And the farming was always cost way more than what they made. So they were thinking about ripping out the vineyard that surrounded their house. It's about 1.25 acres of Grenache that was planted in 1998. So those are pretty old vines, Grenache Blanc when it comes to Grenache Blanc.
Absolutely.
And he reached out to me, and I was skeptical at first. And so I didn't really pursue it. And then in 2020, he offered again. And I came out again and looked at it, and I don't know, just kind of on a whim, I was like, well, how much? What do you want to do with this? And he said, well, I'll tell you what, I want to live here until I die, but I don't want to deal with the property anymore. What do you guys think about leasing to buy? And you let me live here and you farm the fruit and take care of everything else. And went back to my wife and said, what do you think about this? And she was like, let's do it. So in 2020, we took over the vineyard and we started farming it, or I started farming it. And I've basically been farming this little vineyard by hand since 2020. It had been a little neglected the last couple of years. It was originally cane pruned, and then because it's just easier for the vineyard crew to do, they moved it over to cordon. And so we've been changing it as we've been on there. But considering how old the vines are, it just makes great wine.
And it's 100% Grenache Blanc, right?
It's 100% Grenache Blanc. It was, the rootstocks are actually Merlot, from a Merlot vineyard that was planted in 95. For some reason, and he doesn't really know why, someone talked him into grafting it over because the Merlot never ripened up very well. So he planted a Grenache Blanc in 99, budded over. So that being said, there's still like 2 Merlot vines that are growing because the Grenache Blanc didn't take, and then the Merlot has come back. And I just leave them. We don't pick them. We just kind of like, oh, that's cool. That's the old Merlot.
But most importantly, you have to tell everyone the name of your estate vineyard.
We need to know that. We need to know the origin of the name of the vineyard.
Yeah, well, originally it was the Mathis Vineyard. It's spelled a little different than a single vineyard bottling, which I think you guys have. So I knew right away, like, I can't have Mathis Vineyard on the label because I already have a Mathis that's spelled with 1 H, and it just doesn't make sense. So what are we going to call it? At the time, my daughter was 5, and we always play like name that game. So I'm like, all right, what are we going to call this vineyard? Give me some names. And her first choice was Unicorn's Lair, which I do love, but I was a little worried that the very famous Griffin's Lairs lawyers might say that's a little too close. So I said, what's your second choice? And
there is also a unicorn winery out there, although it doesn't exist. So no, it's closed. There actually was one that had that name, and I looked it up, and it was closed like in 2016 or something. So I thought that was hysterical.
Well, we could have got it then.
Yeah,
maybe Griffin's Lair would have left us alone, but I didn't want to find out. So I was like, all right, what's your second choice? And she said, what about Kitty Face? And I'm like, that's it. So from 2021, it was 21 that we named it Kitty Face. That was our second estate bottling off of the property, and henceforth it is known as Kitty Face. And Henry, who lives on the property, loves it.
Have you considered planting some trees or some shrubbery in an actual kitty face, similar to the what is it, the Heart Vineyard down here in Paso Robles that Niner owns, for cat enthusiasts, for weddings, all sorts of things.
Oh man, I got enough work to do.
Just, here to help you with the marketing. You can use that idea for free. It's all yours. So take us through the production of this Grenache Blanc. What are you doing differently? Obviously, it's a different grape than Grenache Noir, a different style, but what are you doing differently when it comes to Grenache Blanc?
For all my Grenache Blanc productions kind of was always been standard. I worked for the Cake Breads in Napa Valley for a long time, and they're kind of masters of Chardonnay and Sauv Blanc, and so I really have a stronger foundation. I mean, we made red wines, and don't get me wrong, I made lots of red wines, but that's kind of what I ended up doing while I worked there for 9 years, was all the white wine production, and they focused on crisp, acid-driven, fresh wines, and so I already had that background. So when I came into this, I was like, I'm going to make this Grenache Blanc lively and acid-driven. So that's kind of the foundation. The Vineyard kitty face really holds on to his acid well. I think that's why it's kind of become an incredible site in my mind. And so when we typically pick at like 22.5 bricks. And the acid's still at 7 grams per liter. So, it's zingy. We bring it into the winery, we pick it at night, press it right away into a tank and cold settle it. And that's the process of just chilling the juice down. A liquid that's cool has a harder time of holding solids, so all the solids precipitate out. So we clarify the juice, move it into our concrete egg, and then a few neutral French oak barrels and stainless steel drums, and ferment it. I used to do all native ferments, not adding commercial yeast to my whites, but I've found over the years that the more wine I make, the more problematic it is, the more work it takes while I'm doing other things. So I have, over the last few years, inoculated this wine, but it really at a low rate, so it ferments really slowly. And then once it's done, I move the other vessels. We fill up the egg. We hit it with its 1 dose of sulfur to make sure malolactic fermentation doesn't continue. And it sits in that egg unmolested for 8 months. And we bottle it in July or August of the following year.
So did you say it's fermented in the egg and a neutral drum and stainless steel drum? Or... Yeah,
because the egg only has so much volume. You can't fill it up to ferment in. And so I need other vessels to be able to fill it up when it's done fermenting. So 85% of it's fermented in the egg, and then I ferment the extra in other vessels. Okay. So I have something to top the egg up when it's done.
But that's more of a utility than, more arsenal, more, flavor profiles in your belt for blending.
Right. And in the past, I've done Grenache Blanc in neutral barrel or just stainless steel drum. And that's why I ended up buying that egg. Is it just gives this nice round mouthfeel in the mid palate. I think it just makes this lovely wine. And the beauty of a concrete egg is the shape. Because of thermodynamics, it's sitting in a cold cellar. So the outside of the concrete is cooler than the inside where the wine is. And so that makes this constant convection current, and it just does this. And that wine just moves. And so you do get some of the solids, the yeast lees settling down, of course, but a lot of it is still in motion. And 5 months after I put the wine in that egg and you take a sample out of it, it's still cloudy. And that's really what we're looking for in making a white wine that fills the palate and is round. And so, having that yeast, those dead yeast cells in suspension gives you that creaminess.
Yeah, it's basically a Surly's technique without you having to go in and do batonnage and stirring on a regular basis.
It's true.
Yeah,
but the acidity is incredible because you do get that roundness, and a lot of times, and even when I'm writing a wine note, whenever I say round on the palate, I always feel how someone can interpret it, not tasting it, as everything we hate about roundness, like a round buttery Chardonnay or something like that. but it's this beautiful roundness on the mid palate that's textured, and then the acidity washes over. It just everything about the wine, it lingers. It's got body. It just, it isn't quick. It isn't short. It isn't one-dimensional. It's multi-dimensional.
No, it reminds me a lot of biting into like a really perfectly ripe honey crisp apple, where you get that sweetness, that roundness, but you also have that little burst of acidity there that balances everything out.
Yeah, and you know what, if that roundness from that egg wasn't there, it would be pretty lean wine. Grenache Blanc does have some nice fruit on it, but when I'm picking a little less ripe, it can be angular, and so I was really drawn to the way the egg made that mouthfeel work.
Yeah. Well, as someone who's a little biased towards Grenache Blanc, as it's the, basis of my flagship sparkling wine, I'd love to hear some of your pairing concepts, food pairings with this particular Grenache Blanc.
I mean, I love this with Asian food, with salads, works great with cream sauces. I mean, it's just that standard, high acid wine that just kind of cuts through fat. My wife is actually a cheese specialist and a cheesemonger, so we drink it a lot with big fatty cheeses, sheep milk cheeses, even some cow stuff and blue cheese. Give me one sec, I gotta grab my battery.
Yeah, no worries. I was going to say, this to me just screams like triple cream brie. I want with this, that balance of fruit and acid with the creaminess, the earthiness of a nice, like a Saint Andre or some other triple cream brie would just be amazing with this.
Or even just going with like an aged manchego, something that gives you the roundness with still the texture of the hard cheese.
Yeah.
That sounds delicious.
Great options. Or, for the vegans who are on tonight, there's some great creamy, cashew and nut milk cheeses out there for Mike and Jeannie. We have to be everything to everybody here. So, excellent. Well, let's move on to our next wine, which is the Carbonic Grenache Blanc, the 2022.
Did you already enjoy that one, Chris?
I know. Wow, Chris.
I did. Yes, I've been sampling these over the last couple of nights. Teresa's not here, so while the cat's away, while the kitty face is away, one should say. But take us through your thought of working with Grenache in a carbonic state. Obviously, more Grenache grown here than Gamay. You're starting to see a lot of winemakers, carbonic is one of those trends that a lot of people have picked up on, and it does seem that Grenache is one of the grapes, along with Cinsault, along with Gamay, kind of leading the way for the carbonic movement.
Yeah, absolutely. I made the first one in 2018, and there weren't a whole lot of people doing it, but it was more out of, once I just like to experiment, but I was getting fruit from the Mathis Vineyard, where this wine's from, that is the Spanish clone and has little berries, and it was always just really tannic. So my first trial on this was really to kind of tame those tannins, and I was like, well, if I do a carbonic, we don't get all this skin contact with the juice. It'll just be a fun experiment, and that 18 was just a glorious wine, and I was like, okay, here it is, and people loved it, and so we've been doing just a little bit. I do about a ton every year in this style, and it's just always a really fun, easy, soft, quaffable wine.
Yeah, although I'm really impressed by the acidity on this wine. It has a lot more tartness than I'm used to with a lot of the carbonic wines, which can be a little round, have more of that bubblegummy kind of sweeter note to it. But this one, it has a tremendous amount of acidity in a good way, where it's really, cuts through. I don't think, other than the lightness of the body and even the color, I don't think a lot of people would peg this as a carbonic wine, because it doesn't have a lot of those telltale notes of a carbonic.
You also wouldn't expect some like the drying tannins.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where this came from, is that site is just so tannic. But I also do kind of a hybrid carbonic, because it's still a carbonic ferment. I lock it up for 10 to 14 days, depending on how it smells. and then I foot tread it and do a couple days of pump overs. And so the idea here is that I love carbonic wines and what it brings, but I want it to be a varietal correct. And in my day job, I've made a lot of carbonic wines for people. And more often than not, if they're 100% carbonic, that's what they are. You could do a Syrah, you could do a Zin, you could do just about anything, and we've done it. And all you taste is those carbonic notes. And so I don't really want that. I want it to be carbonic, but also be like, all right, this is a Grenache Noir.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the Mathis Vineyard. It's working with the Spanish clone of Grenache. You know, take us through some of the differences with the clones. Do you have your preference for what you like to work with? Does it differ from wine to wine, or is there one or two particular clones that you really prefer when it comes to making Grenache?
There are definitely clones that I seek out. There is the first would be the Alban clone, which is actually probably Budwood, and I say probably because he won't admit to it, but it's more than likely not Budwood from Chateaubriand and Chateauneuf. That was brought in by him, by John Alban in 73. And so I really like working that clone. There's not a lot of plant in it anymore. The original Budwood, because it was diseased and it's not the easiest to farm. In fact, the only wine I make is from the Mounts family, who has one row left. They had ripped out everything else, and they saved that row for me. It's a really nice varietal. It's a clone. It's smaller, clustered. Grenache likes to be like these big chandeliers, and that Alban, which Reyes clone, is a little bigger than Pinot clusters. I mean, a little bigger than Pinot clusters. Smaller berry, really aromatic, but has this really nice spice to it. There's also a French clone from the French Organization for Agriculture called 362, which is basically the same Budwood, but it's been cleaned. So it's been propagated in a nursery until, many generations until they've gotten the disease out of it. I like that second, maybe. And that's funny because you would think it'd be better because it's been cleaned up, but it's just something about that old Budwood that I love. And then there's 513, which is the Spanish clone, which is at Mathis Vineyard. And that's really small berry. In fact, it's kind of leggy in the clusters, and those little berries just pack a punch with tannin. Little berries with lots of seeds. There's not a lot of it planted out there. And there's actually a new clone out there that we're going to be working with this year, which is the Sardinian Grenache, which would be super fun.
The Grenachista, as I believe it is called up there.
Correct. And then if I walk into a vineyard, and no offense to the Haas's or Tablas Creek at all, because they do great work, but if there's a Tablas clone of Grenache, I typically don't want it. They're just the biggest clusters you'll ever see, and it makes a great rosé, but I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, but I don't think it makes good Grenache.
That's okay. This isn't going on YouTube and won't be available to the public, so I think you're safe. You're fine.
Yeah. Well, it's the truth. So there you go.
Hey, I have a question for you, Casey. First of all, you have one of the most entertaining Instagram feeds possible. But I'm curious, the other day when you were naked, were you the only one in the winery naked?
Yes.
Just checking. Everyone else looked dressed, but I know you were going for a swim, so.
Yeah.
You suddenly got like 10 new follows on your Instagram, by the way, just so you know.
10.
Well, that's who's on here. But then, in the days to follow when people watch the replay, which we're totally not putting up, because of the lawsuit, the libel lawsuit from the Perrin and Haas family.
Oh, they'll be all right. I've said it in public before.
You are Grenachista, which we will talk about that fighting spirit in a bit. But that's very interesting. One of the things I've always found so fascinating with Grenache is, I think, more than just about any other grape, maybe Cabernet Sauvignon, but even then, you're still a little boxed in for what you can do with it. But Grenache can be done in so many different styles, from the rosés, as you mentioned, but even light, bright, real crisp, acid-driven style Grenache Noirs to more of that Spanish, the heavy tannins, the rich, earthy, real powerful style.
It's the best, right?
It's absolutely. I remember years ago, not too many years ago, but it feels like every 2 or 3 years, somebody in one of the major publications writes an article about how Grenache is set to surpass Pinot Noir, become the new Pinot Noir in terms of single vineyard designations and whatnot. And it's never quite taken off. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. It makes me nervous when they start writing those articles because I'm like, oh, Syrah, here we go again.
Chris, there are 4,400 acres of Grenache, and there are like 50,000 acres of Pinot. I don't think Grenache is overtaking. Now, Syrah, on the other hand, has equal amount of planting and could, but it just doesn't take off. But Grenache doesn't have the planting to take over.
It's not an overtaking, but it's this idea that it's going to sort of reach the echelon of Pinot in terms of the elegance, the price points, the single vineyard, the scores, whatever you want to. It's kind of that milieu of prestige that it seems like Grenache, every 5 years, somebody writes the article that it's always on the cusp, but it never seems to get there.
I'm trying. I can only do so much.
It's true. I think the giant fist on your label might be warding people off. If you were to put a really beautiful line drawing of a fake French chateau, you might be able to charge a few more dollars for those.
Whatever it takes.
Spoken like a true Grenachista, like a true guerrilla rebel.
But I think what's really fun is that Casey to your point, Chris, that Grenache is versatile in how a Grenache Noir can come out. It's also all the different ways Casey works with it, because we're tasting a Carbonic, we're tasting 2 red wines, but he also does Pet Nat, he does Rosé, he does Piquette. Sorry, can't speak.
It could be Picante, but it
can't be Picante, but Piquette. Doing all plus the Blanc, and Greek coming up. It's just one great in versatile styles, not just versatile flavors. And then of course there's terroir that plays a part in it, and clones.
What other varietal could really do this? And that's why I kind of ended up here and making all these different wines out of the same 3 varietals. Is Pinot can do some stuff, sure. But could you do all this stuff with Cabernet or Chardonnay?
No, you're exactly right. Other than maybe a white Zinfandel. No, I'm kidding. I kid. But
no, but there are some grapes that have that versatility. But a lot of those super versatile grapes that can do sparkling, still, sweet, whatever, are white wines. So you don't get a red wine or a rosé. Can do skin contact. But yeah, it limits you, because you don't have Grenache Blanc, you could always vinify a Grenache
Noir,
white, but you can't make a white wine red.
Yeah.
Plus,
you're doing all of this at about a third to a quarter of the price of a ton of Pinot Noir, which also has to come into play, I imagine.
Well, not this year. And for people out there and that don't know, in the wine world, we're all struggling. The entire industry is struggling a little bit. So here we're in harvest, and there's a lot of fruit out there for sale that no one's buying. So if any of you want to make some Pinot Noir, now's your year.
If you want to pay a lot of money for Pinot Noir and then all the money to make it, and then realize you can't sell it, go for it.
Well,
that too. But you can get really nice Pinot right now from some of those big vineyards for, a lot less, maybe not half, but a big chunk of money out of there. But going to your point, yes, that's kind of why I started this. I started for a lot of reasons, but at the time, you could get a ton of Grenache for $2,500, where that, right next door to it was a Pinot vineyard that was selling it for $6,000 a ton. So, I love Grenache and I love all the things about it. But this is a business at the end of the day. And I was like, haha.
Have you, I have to ask, have you found, you know, being a Grenachista and focusing on one varietal, obviously you've got a lot of techniques, but have you found it limiting? Or what are the challenges of being so narrowly focused?
Well, that's kind of why I ended up doing this. I can be scattershot if I didn't have guardrails in my life, just about for everything. And so I knew that by having these varietals, I would have some containment. And even that I've, blown through, because it's like, how many ways can I make this? But if I was just doing like a CR Graybehl label, I would probably have 30 different varietals, or maybe 12, but 60 different bottlings. So in doing this, it was by design. I never get bored with it. I also make wine for other people, and I get to experiment in that way. So I end up making fruit wines and just anything I want. But for the Grenachista, it's fun to really stretch out what this varietal can do, and it keeps me sane, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's it's sort of like the folks with ADHD. Like if you give them something to focus on, a fidget spinner or whatnot, like it helps alleviate that. Not that you're ADHD by any stretch
I
of
don't
the
think so.
yeah. It's a bad analogy, but I'm going with it.
No, it works.
So to sort of put the cork in the bottle, what's left of it, of the Carbonic, what would you pair with this, or what would your lovely cheesemongering wife pair with this one?
That's a hard one, because I think that's more of just a drinker.
Mhm.
I think that's what you have while you're waiting for everybody to finish dinner, and maybe with some snacks. Just because it was never meant to be like a really thoughtful wine where you think about it. It was always meant to be, this is fun. I like drinking this. That doesn't mean that it won't pair with things, but I just honestly kind of draw a blank, because it's like, I don't think of that wine that way.
Yeah, to me it wants like a prosciutto or a jamon serrano, salami, saucisson, some sort of, just, you're right, kind of a fatty with that high acid level, like a fatty, rich charcuterie plate that you're just snacking on. Even like a hummus, I think, would go
Yeah.
fantastically with this. Just something to nibble on, because you're right, this is a total quaffable wine that you're not going to sit down and order this at a restaurant with your steak and your lamb or anything like that. This is,
although you could
absolutely
I
could.
I think this wine has the tannic ability to stand up to lamb, or maybe like some grilled salmon, tuna. I mean, some of the things you might traditionally think to pair with Pinot Noir. I think that this wine has the freshness, but pork belly burnt ends. I mean, Scott suggests that, but no, I think it has the tannins to stand up to fat.
Yeah, roasted portobello mushrooms would be fantastic with this as well. Like I could see that.
What pops into my head is like a hearty beef stew. I know that's a Cabernet land, but it would cut through it and be quite enjoyable.
Yeah. I think the acid really, acid really helps things out with this. So it really makes push. All right, let's
one quick thing before we jump on to the next wine. I know we're not doing a rosé, but when do you release your next rosé? Because Stacy would really like to know.
I am in the process of making that new one. I got half of it in last week. The second half comes in next week. Typically, I bottle that in January, February. Release it in April. And
Casey, March 29th at the Festival of Forgotten Grapes, the second annual Festival of Forgotten Grapes, would be a great place for you to release your new rosé.
Such a good idea, Allison.
There you go. I typically sell through it by the end of August, and that's where we are right now. So it's sold out, but keep that in mind. You got from March 29th until the end of August to get some rosé of next year.
There you go. Pre-selling. You should do futures on the rosé.
And what's
the first ever?
And what's your total case production?
It's about 400. So actually, it's the largest production I make. All the things, all the other wines are mostly small lot stuff. But Grenache makes the best rosé, so everybody loves rosé. You know, what's funny is that out in the wine market right now, rosé is a hard sell, but like Grenache rosé, man.
Well, you're on a ticking clock when it comes to rosé. You know, you release it if you're lucky, you can release it like Valentine's Day, and you know, then pretty much if it isn't sold by Labor Day weekend, you know, here in California it's a little different but the rest of the country, yeah, it's basically a first warm day to last warm day wine, as a distributor once told me.
I agree, and when I see it on the shelves and it's, you know, last year's vintage, I'm like, ooh, never mind.
Oh, see, I'm the opposite. I will absolutely snap those up because I think rosés do tend to hold a couple of years. You know, they don't turn that quickly, and you can get some great bargains if you've got that 1 or even 2 year off rosés.
I like them really bright and fresh, and that's why I only make as much as I could sell, because I don't want it sitting around. I want it like, bang, it's done. You know, drink it until it starts to get a little, turn that corner and get a little, dark's not the right word, but it kind of loses the freshness, and I'm out.
Yeah.
And you know, luckily, we have 100-degree weather in September and sometimes October. So here in LA, at least. So you know,
yeah,
we
here
can
on the
drink
Central Coast
rosé
as well.
up until Christmas. And your style of rosé, it's being asked, are you Provence style or are you not?
Oh yeah, definitely. I like acid driven, so it's on the lighter side. And that's why Grenache makes the best rosé, because you get that watermelon rind and strawberry. That's the best.
I have to ask, have you ever been tempted to blend in even a little bit of something else? You know, you see Mourvèdre out there, like a siren calling your name. Maybe, you know, oh, we can get you half a ton of Syrah to blend in. Any moments of weakness?
No. I mean, you know, if I didn't have a label called the Grenachista, heck yeah. I'd love to throw some Synthol in there, or some yeah, there's lots of things I would put in there, but that's like, the whole thing.
You could rationalize. You could rationalize a GSM.
No.
I was going to say you got 25% to play with.
I know it has to be this way.
I respect that, and I like that. I'm just saying you could push the boundaries if you really wanted by doing a GSM or a.
Well, last year I got a label. I'm artistic, and so I like to design things. I design my own label. I always, my brain just runs. And so last year, you remember the old Icy?
Yeah.
With the bear.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. The blue and the red. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I made this label that instead
I was a slush puppy guy, but Ices were good too.
I mean, you know, we all make mistakes, but
not with slush puppies. Nope.
I took that label, and instead of Icy, it says Rosé. And I got it approved by the TTB.
Wow.
I got a trademark. I don't know if it holds any water.
How different is the bear? That's what I think Icy would be coming after you at.
There's no bear. It's just the 4 squares, and it says Rosé with the ice on it and stuff. And so that all being said, and don't no one steal it because I got the trademark. I could certainly go out there and make a rosé that wasn't all Grenache. And I've thought about it and put it out in that label, and that label's awesome. But I just no, this whole project is about Grenache, so I got to stick with it.
I'm, what Allison wants. I'm feeling a capital G, little s, little m. Where you're
no, I don't. I'm very
80% Grenache, 10% each Syrah and Mourvèdre.
I'm very, very happy with the all Grenache always. I think it's a great concept, a great selling thing. I think it's a versatile grape. I love it. Yeah.
As somebody else, as a fellow wine brand owner who is narrow casting his wines as well, I'm right there with you, my friend. So yeah. Let's do this, and let's move on to the main event. And if you can, everybody, if you are opening up these wines, I think this is one of those perfect opportunities to pour both of them side by side and really compare and contrast these two wines.
I'd like to, but I haven't yet.
Together to each other. So if you just want to jump on to the next one, this is the 21 North Coast Grenache. But if you want to do the side by side, I think doing the 21 Mathis with 1H Vineyard is a really fun chance to get to,
I have to go get another glass.
Okay, because I put it on you. To challenge to test your palate and really discover the differences in a blend versus a single vineyard designated wine. So kind of walk us through first the North Coast wine. I think this, if I'm not mistaken, this is sort of your flagship, right? This was the first one that you did.
No, actually,
Oh.
it's the newest label.
Oh, okay.
Or not newest label, the newest blend. And
oh, that's right, because you had been doing the mounts, but with mounts no longer. That's how this one came about.
well, no, I still get mounts fruit, but no, I had always made, it's small lot production, so I made 4 barrels or 5 barrels, and I needed all 5 to be bottled at that vineyard designate. But as you do in the cellar, and I'm tasting barrels, I would do spot blends of the different vineyards just to see what it looked like. And I always really liked it, but I never had enough wine to actually make that blend and put it in a bottle. And so it's slowly ramping up production over the last 5 years. 2021 was a pretty large year production wise. And so I ended up with a few barrels left over from each of the vineyards, even after I hit my goals for what I need for the single vineyards. And so I was able in 2021 to actually put that together as the North Coast. And so it's a blend of all of my vineyard designates and then one additional vineyard that's here in Sonoma Valley, to make, it would be like how a Pinot Noir maker has all their single vineyards and then they have the Sonoma Coast. Right. And for those that don't know, typically that Sonoma Coast blend of Pinot Noir is all the barrels they've kicked out of their vineyard designate, and it's the press wines, the hard press and the light press. And no, I mean, that's just how the sausage is made. It's no attack on the quality. They're still beautiful wines, but they're the ones that aren't quite in that single vineyard designate. And that's basically what I did, is I took the barrels that I didn't love as much as the other ones and separated those out and made them larger than their parts by making them a blend. And it just ended up being a really lovely wine, as it had always been in the cellar when I messed around with it. And so that being said, it's really a value wine because you think it's the more expensive of my single vineyard bottlings all mixed together. It was also, this is still a business, and I had been asked for a long time to make a wine that was more in that like by the glass program at a restaurant, or a more, the lower tier shelf wine. And so in 21, I put that together to be like, all right, this is our entry level Grenache Noir.
So tasting these side by side, I'm curious about that, on that point of that entry level, whatever. When in the theory that you're taking the lesser of barrels, like the best barrels go into the single one, the best tasting. Not to say that the others aren't as good, they just aren't shining as a single bottling.
Yes.
You put them into a blend, and these ones are very different. Is that more because it's the combination of all the different vineyards together, and that if we tasted one of your other single vineyards, we'd find it to be a lighter style? Another one would be a juicier, another more tannicky, and when together you get this North Coast, because they are, I mean, it is a lighter Grenache. It is a friendlier. It is more
fruit. Yeah, it's
Grenache.
Definitely has a little bit more fruit forwardness than the Mathis.
I mean, that's more just the blend you do at the end, right?
Well, Allison, you hit it on the head. That's exactly what happens, is that you put all those things together and you ended up with that. And every year as I was messing around the cellar, I didn't always get that like lighter style wine. But in 21, it was a combination of some of the more ripe stuff and the less ripe stuff. And maybe, I only had 1 barrel from one vineyard and 2 barrels from the other vineyard, and putting them all together made that just really fun, enjoyable wine.
Now, when you're going through and tasting the lots separately from the different vineyards, you're picking out the barrels that are, superior, kind of setting aside the second tier. We won't call them the lesser barrels, but the second tier. When you're going through that, are you putting that blend together in your mind for the North Coast? Do you have an idea of, I'm gonna, lean a little more heavily into this one? This B is going to add a little bit more, or is it an entirely different process once those extra barrels come together?
I would like to say it's the first one, but it's not. It's really more driven by it's the kitchen sink, what I deem as not quite, and that's not fair to this wine to say those barrels that aren't quite good enough for
You're not just throwing everything that's left over into a vat and it's kind of like come what may.
Yeah.
Oh, you are. Okay.
That's exactly what I did.
So the final blend in the end varies vineyard to vineyard, really just depending on, it's not equal parts.
No, it's not equal parts.
Yeah. But he's also not controlling it. He's not orchestrating it. He's just
it's not equal parts, and it's not the same breakdown each year.
No, it's always different. And that's what the fun thing about it is. I do want it to be a lighter wine. So there is some thought in that. I don't, as an entry level, approachable Grenache Noir, it's got to hit that. I don't want it to be like big and thoughtful like my other wines. But you're both right, because there is also like, oh shit, 2 of these barrels I'm going to keep out because my production number target is really like 500 cases. And so some of it is kind of like, oh, it's a kitchen sink catch-all blend. And I'm not trying.
The idea the sum is greater than the parts. That in some cases, those particular barrels weren't as good on their own, but when they're blended, they're even better.
I think that's really what it's all about. And I guess I want to back up a little bit. Like, if there was a bad barrel, it wouldn't be any of the blends.
Sure.
That doesn't happen all that often. Shit happens every once in a while, but yes, it is always meant to be like in fun, easy wine, where I don't think that hard about it either.
Yeah. Got it. I think that was my big question was, how much of a thought and a blending process went into this. And obviously there is a thumbs up, thumbs down when it comes to barrels, but you're not sitting there going, this is going to be, 37% of the Mathis versus this much of the Mounts versus 36% of the Mathis versus whatever. Yeah.
That made my brain hurt.
Yeah, sorry. It actually made mine too. You know what I recommend? Drinking more.
Yeah.
And I'm a doctor, so you should listen to me.
Yeah, I heard you.
Are you
in his own lacking mind?
I was a cardiologist at Casa Escobar on Wilshire Boulevard in LA. That's for like 5 years.
But it is a really interesting thing that the North Coast has a lot of fruit aromas, and the Mathis I'm getting kind of like a milk chocolate mint.
So like a junior mint.
No, not as strong as that. A little more Andes.
Okay.
Ish. Stronger on the chocolate than the mint, but
the Mathis really always leans more herbaceous to me. It's that the terroir of that site. And that's another reason why I love Grenache, but it really shows the sage that grows along the vineyard and the oaks that are surrounding it. It just has that, it's not green, but it has French herbs almost.
Yeah.
And take us through the different geographies of the vineyards that you work with. Obviously, we can talk about Mathis specifically, but with the other vineyards that this blend is going into, obviously you're doing single vineyard designates with those wines. What are the differences? What are you finding are the differences?
Well, shit, I'm all over the place. Mendocino, which is Alder Springs, is high up in Mendocino County, almost to the Humboldt County border.
Okay. Wow.
And it's at about 1,200 feet.
She's not the first child we've had play around, so you're all good.
And this is not the first Zoom meeting she's jumped into.
It's very BBC
I mean, she
dad.
is the person who named Kitty Face Vineyard, so she does have a place in this.
Right. It's totally true. Basically, all those vineyards are as different as they could be, and that's the whole idea behind it. Both clonal selections, geography, climate. When I started this, I always thought that Grenache needed really hot weather, because that's what it is in Vaucluse and Gigondas and Chateauneuf. But as I've progressed through this, I've kind of come to the idea that I like the cooler sites that make these kind of bright Grenaches. So it is a combination of the two. As we were kind of talking about the blend, I would have to say that most of it is coming from the cooler sites, and that's where you get that fruit power, where the warmer sites, and Mathis being one of them, kind of brings more weight and more of the herbaceousness. So short story long, like it's all of it in North Bay. We have rock, we have sand, we work with some vineyards that are Napa Carneros, that it's clay. It's pretty much we run the gamut that is the North Bay.
But you're sticking primarily with North Coast, Sonoma, Napa, Mendocino. You started in the Central Coast. Have you been tempted to source some fruit from San Luis Obispo, Ballard Canyon, Paso Robles, west side of Paso Robles areas?
I have, absolutely. But I have not made it happen, just because I have a day job where I run this large winemaking facility and then make wines for other people. So I work with a bunch of people that do that and drive down there with their U-Haul truck and pick up, 4 bins of we just saw some Alta Colina Viognier come in yesterday in the same way. And I just can't make it happen. I would love to, but getting in a truck and driving all night and picking that fruit up, coming back and working 6 days a week. I
think you just resolved exactly why being the Grenachista, not just because of the diversity of the grape, not because of the versatility of the grape, but you get to work with all the other grapes. So you don't need to test the water with other varieties. You get to play with them every day.
I do. And I make other wines for other people and other varietals. So yes, if I was only making, I would still do it. But I do get to make Pinot, and I do get to make Cabernet and other things. So yeah. But that being said, I do get some Sierra Foothills fruit. It's like every couple of years when I find a vineyard, and we've found one that we're sticking with. So that'll come out next year. I'm not opposed to getting fruit from all over, but like I said, it's a one-man show, and if I had an assistant to go take care of it, man, we would have it.
So it's when you finally land that wealthy benefactor and can quit your day job, that's when we'll start to see those other geographies come online.
Do you know any?
Believe me, man, if I did, I wouldn't be telling you.
I mean,
offense.
in the future, absolutely, I would love to do that. I would love to have put on the table Grenache from all over. I'm an adventurous spirit. Let's do it. Let's get some Columbia Valley and some Rogue River stuff, and heck yeah. But I can't.
Shenandoah Valley in Virginia.
Now you're
cross
crossing
country.
Now you're crossing borders. We were just saying going down to the Central
Yeah, it's
Coast,
true.
but
apparently the Monterey County line is the hard out. San Benito.
Yeah, even that. I mean, I just can't do it. I'm too old for that shit.
In terms of the two different styles, are they made generally the same way in terms of aging and vinification?
For the most part, the North Coast usually doesn't stay in barrel for as long. All my vineyard designates go into large format 500-liter puncheons with some new, some neutral. And I always end up, and that's kind of how this happens. So I guess I'll go a little deeper on that story, is that when you make wine and you buy barrels, it never works out to the volume that you make fits all the way into the volume that the vessels are.
Right.
And so I typically store everything in puncheons, which are 500 liter. That's 132 gallons. It's basically twice the size of a normal barrel. When you put that wine in there, well, you look in the tank and there's still, some wine in there. So I still use some 60-gallon barrels and ending up with like kegs and stuff to make the volumes work. And that's typically that's what that North Coast ended up being. It was the 60-gallon barrels that didn't fit in the 500 liters. Or I took a little bit of the 500 because it tasted good to blend into that. And that's still the way things go. I have mostly wine in 500 liter puncheons, but also have a bunch of wine in 60 gallons because it just never fits right.
And what's your typical aging regime for your single vineyard designates?
Those are typically 18 months to, basically 2 years in those large vessels.
Have you
So at what point are you determining it doesn't become a single vineyard? You're doing that before the aging or during?
No, that's typically a year in. And that's when the North Coast gets bottled after 1 year of aging. And that's when I start. That's when you really get a good idea of what that wine's turning into. Grenache, it's a slow ager. And I learned that kind of the hard way. The first 2 vintages I only cellared them for 1 year. And then they had to they ended up sitting in the bottle for about 3 years before they came around. And that's not, that's how the Chateauneufs do it too, is that they go into bottle and they just take about a year to come around. And so what I found is that I like the progression that happens that next year in the barrel more so than I liked in the bottle. And so it was a learning experience. And now everything that's meant to be an ageable or the single vineyards, which I think can age quite well, it's been 2 years in barrel. Everything that's more like drink this and have fun is aged 1 year.
I know we've established, you're on a budget, you're a one-man band doing this, but have you, since you love to play with variables, have you thought about doing some deeper oak aging, some, more oak barrels, longer aging for some of these wines?
Yeah, I played around with all of that. I also started with not using any new oak. And then because of where I work with a lot of Pinot producers, and some of the really high-end ones, which I work with, we'll only use oak barrels once or sometimes just twice. And so I have access to those, and I have over the years bought like their once used barrels and put wine into them and really liked that. And then I kind of graduated to like, oh, well, if I find the right coopers that are low impact, I can put Grenache in new barrels. And I do that. And I don't think that you would taste that on any of those wines you're drinking right now. You wouldn't taste it on the Carbonic because that doesn't go into new oak, but both the North Coast and the Mathis has some new oak on it. But I don't know about extended aging. I know like Sinquenon does some 3 years aging on barrels. I just think that's maybe too much. I have never experimented. I probably should hold the barrel back and see what happens if it sits for 3 years.
Yeah, you normally don't hear a lot of people. Outside of, there's a couple of companies I know that are doing like 3 and 4 year Grenaches and whatnot. Just as almost, I won't call it a gimmick, but it's just kind of their thing. But it's not the normal. It seems like Grenache is intended to be a younger wine, 1 year, 2 year of aging max, it seems like.
I agree. There's always a way to sell some wine, and if you go out there and you say, well, mine's been in barrel for 3 years and people buy it, then hey, sign me up.
Right. Yes. 48-month Grenache. Let's see how it goes.
But you also have to remember it costs money. You have to keep that wine in the cellar for an extra year. I really think that although I like the 2 year program, the longer the wine's in the barrel, the more at risk it is. And so when you start getting into the 3 year program, that's just another year of risk, because that's where you get oxygen and you get blooms. And you just have to maintain it in that environment for an extra year. And in my opinion, I don't think you benefit anything of it. It's just all risk and no reward.
I think that's a great way to put it. How did the Grenachista name come to be?
Oh, the Grenachista is actually a trade organization based in Vaucluse in southern France. As I would assume that most of your listeners know, if they've been watching you, is most of the wines in France are blends. Chateauneuf is certainly the same, but Grenache is typically the majority of the blend. And so this trade organization wanted to remind everybody how important Grenache is to French winemaking, southern French wines, and Grenache and rosés, and all those wines that come from Languedoc and etc. So they champion Grenache in not only in France but all over the world. And so I was following them for a long time because I discovered Grenache in 2001. And when I started thinking about this label in 2006, I was like, that would be a cool name. I actually ended up meeting the woman who runs their organization in maybe 2011 at a hospice de Rhone, and asked her, could I use that as a wine label? And she was very gracious and said, if you make it your own, it's not ours, you can have it. And so in 2013, when I started this label, I was like, let's do it. And so I trademarked it. I don't have the world trademark because it wouldn't be very fair to the French organization that still exists in France. But
do they have world trademarks?
They do.
Okay.
I don't know if they're effective, but they do.
Probably not to the guy in China who's making, knockoff Nikes and Gucci bags and whatnot.
Right. Flattery is
imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Yep.
There it is.
Nice.
So that's how it started. I was like, hey, well, okay. Now that I say that out loud, I have to back up. The way it is spelled, the Grenachista with the period in there.
Yes, I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
It's because I went on the Instagram and I think the Grenachista was gone. But if I put a period in between it, I could get the handle. And I did that. And then I was like, okay, that's what the label is.
But there's no period anymore.
There is on the labels.
There's on the labels and on my Instagram. It's still the period Grenachista.
Oh, the period. Sorry.
Yeah.
My eye was going to the A, not the E.
Yeah. But you can't use that as an email address or as a domain name because the period throws everything off.
But
Right.
you could as an email address.
Could you?
Oh yeah.
I'll have to dig in.
There's plenty of people I know who are, like bob.jones@gmail.com. So
Yes, but it wouldn't be at the period Grenachista.
Oh, well, yeah, you'd have to register Grenachista and then have the Grenachista as a secondary site, which you could do, but
which is what I have now. It's like, you can't put the period in the domain name.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it.
So talk about your Instagram and how you're so creative and funny. And
wow, Jesus, could you
I
throw
know,
me
right?
your softball?
But I mean, I think,
Good Lord.
I mean, obviously, look,
Casey, your wines are so good. How did you become such a great winemaker?
no, look, it's because they're so creative and they're out of the box and they're not always wine related, but you always bring it back to wine. You insert your wine in a lot of places.
I do.
Whoa,
It's
easy. This is a PG. PG.
Go look at his Instagram and you'll understand.
I don't want to know where he's inserting wine.
I've always felt that wine was just even when I started way back when, it was just had the sense of, and everyone's talked about it, the unapproachability and the snobbery. And, you read those tasting notes where, you're like, what the fuck is that? Sorry.
No, that's okay. We can fucking swear on this thing. It's fine.
Awesome. And I always felt like, hey, we should all take it down a notch. Like, this is really, it's a beverage about celebration, about coming together. Let's just enjoy what it, and that's been the way with wine for 6,000 years, right? It's been a way for us to come together and to enjoy each other. It shouldn't be so snobby.
Let me
and so
explain if you don't look. Casey was at the Olympics training. He puts himself in with the gymnastic team. It's funny. It's catchy.
He's got some Photoshop skills, or he knows somebody who has Photoshop skills, is what we discovered.
It's me. And I do my own stunts. That was me actually in a leotard I bought from Amazon. And my poor daughter, you guys saw earlier, I was taking the pictures. And so we're in the living room and I'm standing up like this in a leotard. And I know that she'll probably need some psychology later in her life, or she already thinks her father's crazy, so it's no different. But that's kind of where the Instagram really started, was like, hey, let's take this down a notch and we can all laugh. It doesn't have to be serious all the time. Or also, like, I don't have to be selling to you all the time. Like, that's kind of what social media is supposed to be about, is looking at funny pictures.
Yeah.
I have a problem with
than a storefront.
Totally. And I still have I want to move on to where all the kids are with, TikTok and Reels, but I'm just a visual guy. So like the pictures still, I love that. I can't seem to make videos worth of shit. So.
And it looks like, Stacy, if you run out to Whole Foods, you'll find all the rosés.
It's true. That's where all the rosé went. Whole Foods and all of California has the last of the rosé. So if you buy it there, it'll be gone forever. And
if you want the year or 2 year off vintages of rosé, those are available at grocery outlet, because that's where Daddy rolls into and finds his Provence and his Italian risottos that he gets at $3.99 and $4.99 a bottle. They're still drinking great.
I have to say that it's also on sale at Whole Foods right now for like $19.99, which is $8 off of what you pay retail.
Yeah, not bad.
So if you guys buy it all, we can make that happen again.
It's impressive you're selling to Whole Foods with only 400 cases made. Like that's not a lot for somebody like Whole Foods to take on. So that's fantastic.
Not at all. It was I was amazed that they wanted to do it. And just are they here? If Whole Foods ain't listening, they pay more for per case price than anybody else. And I don't know why they do that, but I'll take it any day.
If Lauren Sanchez likes it, then Jeff will do whatever she says. So I think that's clearly the case here.
Yeah.
Nice. So since we're getting short on time, let's just kind of wrap up these two wines. As we talked about, the North Coast, a little more fruit forward, a little less acidity complexity. The Mathis, a little drier, more tannic, a little drier. What food pairings would you put with these two wines?
The North Coast, I kind of get this like bay leaf herbaceousness. So I would be thinking it would like, man, what about like a pesto pasta? Something with sage.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of foods that go well with sage, and I'm drawing a blank at this point.
So you know what the best thing with sage is, you do butter and sage on cheese tortellini. It's a classic, easy Italian dish.
Or you take a chicken breast and you wrap it in prosciutto and you grill it in the sage butter.
Generally, I just use the sage to keep the bad spirits away from my house. But yeah.
Oh, burro e salva is one of the best, simple pasta toppings. Butter and sage. Yeah.
Well, and remember that just like the Carbonic, that wine was really more made to be just sipping on. Yeah. So I think it would go great in that same aspect with, finger foods and charcuterie and maybe a harder Havarti or harder sheep's milk cheese.
I can see that. Now, how about the Mathis?
Mathis is a pretty big boy.
Yeah. So
I think that's kind of where we get into like that, what pairs well with Pinot Noir. So fatty fish. I think that would be great with the red sauce.
Yeah, I think a pepper crusted seared ahi would be fantastic with this. I will, full disclosure, I made a couple of little fillets last night and enjoyed them with the Mathis, and it knocked it out of the park. So
yeah, some buffalo wings.
Yep. Or again, those beautiful, roasted and even smoked portobello mushrooms would go fantastic with this, I think. I
with
could
some
see
buffalo
this
wings.
holding up to something a little smoke, or some buffalo wings. Yes, exactly. Or even the mango habanero wings would be
The
great with this as well.
pulled pork sandwich.
Pulled pork sandwich.
Go really
You're just
well.
gonna lean into it. Do you want to go like otter? Do you want to up your game? Bear, Kodiak bear. Would this go well?
No, I had bear once. I did not like.
It's very fatty. People don't
It was
realize how
gross.
fatty it is. Yeah, exactly.
But, you know, apparently a little roasted dog or fried cat.
Well, only in Ohio. So, yeah.
I've been trying to figure out how to do an Instagram post with those things for like 3 days, and I just can't figure out
I mean,
how to
I
do
think
it.
it's clearly you need to do pairings. You need to do pet wine pairings is what you need to do.
I thought about it. I thought about making like a label with, you know, the cats and the geese, but like I don't mind pissing people off, but you can't piss everybody off.
Thank you, PT Barnum.
But I have to say, just for a second, because there's a lot of problems happening to the immigrant population in Springfield, we need to pull it off of that and make the humor about it, because otherwise people are taking it seriously and it's harming people's lives. So
No,
if we can laugh about it and say that cats go with Grenache Blanc and beagles go with Grenache Gris and German Shepherds go with Grenache Noir, I don't know, just have fun with it.
I don't disagree at all, but I just haven't found a way to make that work.
We know you'll get there. We appreciate it.
I laughed so hard when I saw that I almost spit my dog out.
Oh yeah, I saw that post earlier today. So to kind of wrap things up, what does the future hold for the Grenachista? Are there, what's the next frontier in terms of grapes, in terms of styles, in terms of vineyards, in terms of techniques? Where do you want to go in the next few years?
I don't know. That's the fun of this. I'm not really pushing any limits this year. I was doing, I still do a carbonically fermented Grenache Blanc. So I'll do a little bit of that. Got all the pet nats working. It's the Grenache Gris that I'm super excited about. That's kind of like where I'm going. I'm always on the lookout for new vineyards. But this year I'm not really growing all that much. We're just kind of keeping it level because the wine industry is a little rocky right now.
Yeah.
So
which we'll talk about in the after show.
Yeah,
Larry and Sandy, don't worry.
I haven't added any vineyards this year, and I probably should, because if you want to get into vineyards, in the down cycle is the time to do it.
Buy low, sell high.
Yeah, but I'm just I'm happy right where we are. So I'm not pushing any limits this year. What next year looks like, I couldn't tell you until next year happens. But I would like to keep growing. And as long as, everyone keeps buying wine, we'll keep growing, adding new vineyards, new sites that, are complementary to the single vineyard lineups we already have. But, on the flip side, I also don't want to be, Pats in the Hall and have 19 different Grenaches. I guess if you could sell them, that'd be awesome. But then you get a little diluted. And it seems to me better to focus on, 5 or 6 vineyards and really make great wines out of those.
I was going to say, how many different Grenaches do you have at the moment?
Red
18.
Grenaches?
18.
Yeah, no.
Don't want to get to 19, but I'm at 18.
Maybe 9.
Okay. Nice. Well, this was fun and really eye-opening. Are there any French styles? You mentioned Vacarache, you mentioned Gigondas, you mentioned Chateauneuf-du-Pape, obviously. Are you trying to emulate any of those styles, or are you really letting the vineyard kind of dictate, or your own winemaking style dictate how you make the wines?
All of those. I do have a favorite producer, and that producer's in Gigondas, and it's Saint Comé. I've always loved their wines, and maybe if we go back to that first question and wines that you've had that have influenced you, it's all of those wines that come out of that producer, and that's how I like making wines. They're a little riper than I am, because I do like a little more acid-driven, fresher wines. We also don't live in Gigondas, where it's hotter than hell for all of July and August.
Yeah, but there's also no Mistral that blows down the Sonoma Valley.
Our vines aren't 100 years old, or at least our Grenache vines aren't 100 years old. So we you can't make those wines unless you're there. But if I could, I would. Those are really the wines that I emulate, in that they do everything 100% whole cluster. Just the style of those wines, I think, is beautiful. I love when you have any wine, but I find it more in Grenache, where you get black pepper and white pepper. That's always what I'm striving for. It doesn't happen every year, but like the Saint Comé wines, that's what I get. And when it happens in my wines, I'm always like, where does this come from? I don't know where it comes from. Otherwise, every wine would have it. But I find that more often than not in those Saint Comé wines, and that's what I want.
Are there any of your wines that do have that currently, or?
For the 21 vintage, no. I just bottled the 22. I have a friend and he knows that he's probably wrong, and he probably is, but he thinks that it comes from dead colonies of powdery mildew on the grapes. I mean, I believe it as much as like no one really knows where it comes from. But it happens in Grenache, and it typically happens when it's whole cluster. So it's possible. But anyways, the 21 vintage, no. 22, yes, I have 2 wines that have that black pepper corn on them. 23s are still kind of evolving. So I have one barrel that's really shining with it. But, it's not something that happens every year. And as I mentioned, I wish I could capture that lightning in a bottle.
Yeah. And so, penultimate question, how's the 2024 harvest looking so far?
It's hard for me to answer those questions, because I'm like in the muck. Because I'm not, as I mentioned before, I'm also supervising this big facility and making other wines. So it's just a lot, and that's why I was late. It just eats up so much bandwidth, dealing with how much fruit and the logistics that get moved around. It's not until it's kind of over that I start to process, like, all right, what did this vintage look like? Right now we're just trying to make sure that, like, what vineyard needs to get picked, where the sugar is on those other 6, how the ferment's doing on those 9 lots that are in. So far I only have 1 red lot of Grenache in, and some rosé and the Grenache Gris. So I can't speak how my vintage looks like, but the other fruit, it's been a little problematic because we've had a bunch of heat. We are seeing that tannins are really accessible, meaning that if you are manipulating caps, you're going to start extracting hard tannins. And that's kind of interesting about harvest, is that you don't really know what's going to happen until you get into it. So we all have to shift gears all the time. So I have a bunch of producers that went into doing their normal winemaking procedures, and now I'm like, oh shit, I got to back off, because there seem to be a lot of seed tannin out there. And we're just starting to get in through the Pinot and get into the other varietals. So it's really hard to say. It's good color so far. I can't speak for the Central Coast, but right now up here, our numbers are all out of whack. Sugar's way out ahead of acid. So I think it's going to be a riper year, because everyone's trying to hang it to get that acid to catch up with the sugar levels. So as every harvest is, it's who the fuck knows.
Where is the Kitty Face Vineyard?
It's in Sonoma Valley. It's
in Sonoma Valley.
Yeah, it's on the eastern side, northeastern side, right before it start going up in the hills where Gunlock Bunchu and Lone Madrone and stuff is up that way.
And you mentioned that you make 400 cases of rosé. Of these other wines we've tasted today, the Grenache, how much do you make? Grenache Blanc, sorry.
Grenache Blanc, I typically make, it's split in between 2 bottlings. There's the estate, and then I do the Carbonic. So together, it's about 200 cases.
So small. And then your single vineyard Grenaches versus your North Coast?
The single vineyard, it varies a little bit. Somewhere between, some of it I still get 1 ton off of these properties. So like the Mounts, the Dry Creek Valley, I still get 1 ton. The Mathis Vineyard, the one that you guys drinking, is 1 ton. So that is the equivalent of about 50 cases of wine.
Yeah.
Some of the other vineyard designates, I may get 2 tons or 3 tons. So it's really all over the map. It's somewhere between 50 and 200 cases per single vineyard, and it's usually based more on like what the customers like, and if they buy more of like the cottonwood from Napa Carneros, then I'll make more of that. Then the North Coast, I think I made 125 cases of that.
Yeah, your total case production is about 700, right? I was just checking my Slow Wine Guide entry.
I think that I'm up to about 1,000.
Up to 1,000 now?
And that's with the mostly rosé.
And is the Grenache Blanc equal between Carbonic and regular?
No, it's more estate.
Got it. So the most important question of the night, if folks are up in the Sonoma Valley, which we should point out is basically just kind of north and east of the actual town of Sonoma, right there off of Highway 12, if memory serves. What's the best way to get a hold of you, do a tasting, buy wine from you? How can folks get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. We do tastings by appointment at the cellar. Not right now. We'll start again in November. But as I am a one-man show, if you go onto the website at thegrenachista.com and hit any of the contact buttons, that goes directly to me. So if you want to buy wine or stop by and taste, make an appointment, reach out to me. I reply to everybody. And then you can find my wines all over California and some of the other states.
And online.
Yes.
And online. I forgot about that part. You can buy wine any old time. And it's the same thing. If you buy wine, I'm the one that packs it. I'm the one that ships it. So, it is a one-man show, and I try to accommodate everybody. Funny enough, I don't try, but I insult some people on my Instagram every so often. But then when they reach out to me, I'm like, what do you need? What can I do for you? Let me fix that. And I guess it comes back to like that customer service thing where like, I'm happy to answer questions to anybody. They email me, I reply to them. And I think some people would be surprised. They're like, holy shit, I got the email from the owner winemaker. I didn't get it from like the sales manager.
Well, they did, but you're the sales manager.
Totally. And you know what's funny? It reminds me of when I first started this label, I set up like 3 different email accounts because I had this idea, and I don't know where I got it.
Different personas.
If you just make good wine, people will come. And I kind of wanted to be behind the shades and not be in the public eye about it. I just wanted to make wine. And that doesn't work. Like, you have to put yourself out there. And so I slowly abandoned, Sarah, national sales manager at the Grenachista. And I was just like, nah, fuck that. It's just me. So, and I think that's the story of this label and of my wines. It's just me.
Yes. Well, I think for International Grenache Day coming up, we could not have found a better winemaker or better winery to represent the grape. Clearly, nobody has the passion for the Grenache grape and solely the Grenache grape that you do. So we salute you, Casey, for everything you do. You're a real American hero, or as Bud Light changed it after 9/11, a real man of genius is what you are.
Wait, did you guys hear that?
We'll put it in a not a plaque, but a diploma or certificate of recognition, if you want.
No, I want like a black and white picture of you with the quote next to it.
Okay. We can do that. We'll put it on some fake balsa wood, hardwood with a stain and get it going. If you've got just a couple of minutes, we'd love to unmute everybody. And if anybody has any questions for Casey, you can unmute yourself and ask away. We know you've had a long day, so we won't keep you here too long. That's okay.
Yep.
And you can clearly tell us to go fuck ourselves if you need to.
I don't use such language.
Right.
We're still recording.
Casey, I was just going to say, like, your wines are really interesting, like the diversity of flavors between the acid profiles of like the Carbonic, going to the North Coast and the Mathis, like really interesting. Like the same way how Pinots can go a lot of different ways. You've done a lot of different things with the Grenache. It's really, really interesting.
I'm glad you like them, and that's totally the
Yeah.
whole idea. Is like, I want everyone to remember that there's one guy making this out of one varietal, and how many different ways or different expressions can come out of this grape varietal. So it's not all me; it's also the product I'm working with, but it's me.
It's the grape, because typically, like, everybody knows, like, oh, Grenache is going to be this. It's going to be fruity. It's going to be this. Like, oh, I know, I like a Grenache. Like, but it's fun to see the different ways that you're able to kind of like, not transform the grape, but kind of like make it do the thing it can do.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that too is that I'm really a low impact winemaker, and that's been an evolution as I started working in the Napa Valley, where we touched everything. The more I make wine, and maybe it's also based on like the confidence of I know how this is going to turn out, the less I do. So a lot of it's really driven by where these sites are and the clonal selections and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, as a winemaker, that's sort of your ideal, is the kind of Ronco set it and forget it, where you basically bring the fruit in, you do, the bare minimum in terms of inoculation and yeast and starting the fermentation and letting it go.
Yeah.
Andy has a question.
I like this Mathis so well that I'm wondering if you could cool it, because I can't find a white wine I like, and I like cool wine in the summer. So is there any reason you couldn't cool the Mathis and drink it cold?
I don't think there's any reason not to do that. No, and it's a lower alcohol wine, so I mean,
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Sandy, chill away, and for any wine, chill any wine you want. Every wine should be drunk probably cooler than we drink them.
There you go.
So don't be afraid. If you like it.
Before we jump into the next round of questions, I want to throw out there that our next featured winery of the month for October, several of you may be familiar with them. They were at the Festival of Forgotten Grapes. It is Vega Vineyards. So we're going to be focusing on Italian varietals from the 5. That's right. You're getting 5 for the price of 4 this time. Out of the Santa Rita Hills area.
Santa Ynez Valley.
Well, they're kind of.
He's not in the Santa Rita Hills. He's in the Santa Ynez Valley.
Fair enough. Santa Ynez, Santa Barbara, whatever you want to call it. Yes.
Yeah, 100 yards off of the 101 freeway. So
yeah, exactly. Right off of Santa Rosa Road.
But great cafe there too. I was there this last time and had a fantastic meal.
Great restaurant, Agriturismo. Steve's amazing. Steve Clifton.
So yeah.
I'm
so happy you guys got him, because I mean, I hadn't seen him in like 10 years, like since like when he was still married and it was Palmina and all that. And so it's like, wow, there's been so much that's passed. It's like, oh, it's this guy where nobody's at his table, just standing there. Start talking to him about the wine, and he goes like a little bit of his history. And I'm going, and I sort of like did that. Oh my God, you're.
Yes.
He's a great guy, and he's been around for a long time. He started Brewer Clifton. He left that a couple years ago. His name's still in the label, but he doesn't make that anymore. Palmina, he started at the same time doing Italian varieties. And 3 years ago, he partnered with the owners who started Vega Vineyard, which is the old Mosby project, and he rolled his wines into that. It's still his wines. A lot of the vineyard sources are the same. He just changed the label because he's now the winemaker there. And he's a great, great guy, fascinating guy, lovely guy.
So keep an eye out for that, not next week, but the week after is when that email will come out. And the virtual tasting for that will be on October 10th, Thursday, October 10th.
And you might get Chris and I in the same room.
Yes, we might be shifting a paradigm, which we'll see, unless we end up murdering each other, which is a very real possibility. So you'll want to get the bundle and tune in for that, because
you think he'll swear?
definitely swearing, possibly anger. If you enjoyed the combat sport that was this last Tuesday night, you might see more of that on October 10th. So we'll see.
Well, we know who took whom down. So
Only murders in the building. Yes, exactly.
Only
We will see.
Vineyard. Only murders in the tasting room.
October 10th.
I have a quick question. How does Grenache Blanc compare to Grenache Gris?
Well, Grenache Blanc is a green grape, much like Chardonnay is, and so it makes a white wine. Grenache Gris is actually it's gray, and so when you squeeze it, the juice has a little bit of color, but not a whole lot of color. Most of it that you find out in the market out of California right now is soaked on its skins for a couple days and made into a rosé. I'm going to make a white wine out of it, as they do in Languedoc. So it is as I mentioned before, the DNA is the same, but it is very different grape. So it is. Go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. If I wanted to buy a Languedoc Grenache Gris, what would I buy?
There's only a couple that you can get in California, and I've tried them both, and they're quite good. And I don't even remember their name. I think one of them is the Brahm, Brahm. I would just Google Grenache Gris and do the for sale, and you'll see like 5 of them that you can get.
Or go to wine-searcher.com and put in Grenache Gris and see what comes up. It'll tell you all the retailers who have them and what they are.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Yeah,
I know here in Paso Robles,
MZX or MCV.
MCV is doing one.
They have one.
Dave McGee at Monochrome is working with quite a bit of Grenache Gris, although he's blending it with other grapes, so it's not.
Curran does a rosé out of Grenache Gris out of Santa Barbara County.
So is the Grenache Gris from France? Is that a French Grenache?
We don't really know, but the majority that is planted is in southern Spain and southern France. We're not sure. And Grenache really originated in Sardinia and moved into Spain across Aragon and then down into France. We believe along that migration is where Grenache Blanc came from in Aragon and Spain. We do not know where Grenache Gris started. It may have started in Sardinia. It may have been part of that progression as the clone or the varietal spread across France in the 1300s.
Yeah, it's basically the house of Plantagenet in terms of the amount of incest that's been happening within the family. So, yeah.
When did you say
it's a grape that suffers from hemophilia.
Got it.
That's sad. Casey, when did you say yours was coming out?
I'll probably bottle it this January and then release it in the spring.
We'll look forward to that.
Maybe we can steal him to come to LA for the second annual Festival of Forgotten Grapes and pour these wines for you guys.
He's a one man, so he's only a man.
But it's not harvest time in March.
True.
Right, but it's ski season, and my 9-year-old loves to ski.
Well, and it's not like Mountain High just got torn up in flames. So we have ski resorts out here.
Did you know they're making snow up there?
Well, not right now.
Putting the fire out with the snow.
They were making snow to prevent the fire from getting.
Yeah, that's very cool, isn't it?
That would be good. Yes.
That's smart.
Casey, is the Grenache Gris going to be a regular part of your portfolio moving forward?
It is now, because now I'm committed and Dave Mounts is too. So yes, that's a new SKU that will continue. I don't know how it will continue. If it stays a white wine, it doesn't make sense to me to do a rosé out of it if I'm already doing a Grenache rosé. Right. So it'll probably stay a white wine. I'll just kind of hone in on how to make it better, make the best I can.
Anything on that tonight?
I'm getting internet on.
Perfect.
Chris, if we're going to touch on that hefty topic very briefly of what's happening in the wine industry, do you want to keep the recording going, or would you like to turn that off?
We can probably stop the recording, and then and if Casey needs to go, I think between you and I, Allison, we could certainly talk about it. But if Casey wants to chime in with an answer, we can do that. But I'm going to stop the recording right